Hello, I'm Ben Kling, and this is my music implementation reel using Audiokinetic Wwise and a demo of a game I created in Unity. Before really diving into the music and its implementation, I'm going to take a moment to briefly run through the game itself. In this game, you start in your small apartment to discover that the record you have just put on has begun to skip, and the sculpture that you've left on one of your speakers is tapping a beat in time. After picking up the sculpture and discovering that it really only makes noise when placed on a speaker, you decide to roam around your house and see if any other objects make noise when placed down. So that's the basic gist of the game. You get to run around the apartment, discovering the music you can make with everyday objects. Let's dive into the creation of everything a little bit. For the starting loop, I dug through my music library for a sample that realistically could be created by a record skipping. I ended up picking a small loop from the intro of Afterjoy by Ray Harakami, as it had a really cool distinct synth, but also had plenty of room for both tonal and percussion instruments to be placed on top. After that, I created additional loops out of household objects that I felt would be musical, but also have a wide variety of textures so the player could have multiple choices for sounds without the music ever getting too samey. Ensuring that the player could never make a wrong choice in terms of instrumentation was a really fun challenge for this game. All layers had to be able to interact with each other no matter what object the player chose to put on the speaker. This wasn't too much of a challenge with anything playing high-end percussion, but when it got to stuff like bass lines, it got a little more tricky. I had to make sure that the player had multiple options for low end that could work well individually or together. Additionally, I wanted the player to be able to not only control the arrangement of the song via instrumentation, but also allow them to change sections and feel of the track. For this, I took inspiration from some of my favorite DJs and boiler room sets to find ways for the player to smoothly transition between sections. And lastly, to further create a sense of the environment being a part of the music, I also recorded some stingers of the neighbors banging on the wall in time with the track that the player is creating. This is triggered to play when all 6 of the speakers have an object placed upon them. The first part of implementation was getting the objects to even play the appropriate loops when they are placed upon a speaker in game. Doing this was relatively simple and involved each game object in Unity having an associated music track with a switch that toggles between the loop and an empty music subtrack. Then in Unity, I wrote a little bit of code to ensure that the switch changed only when an object entered the speaker's trigger area and not the other trigger areas in the game. One thing that I wanted to ensure in the game was that the player received quick feedback and confirmation that the object that they placed on the speaker is playing music and contributing to the song that they are creating. The first way that I went about this is by giving the player visual confirmation that the loop is playing. To do this, I used an RTPC to control the intensity of an in-game light attached to the speaker. That way, whenever an object is placed onto a speaker, the light flashes according to the amplitude of the audio coming from the game object. Additionally, I wanted to be able to communicate to the player that the object would make noise eventually, even if its role in the arrangement was relatively sparse. To do this, I recorded individual fills that would play on the next beat of the song. That way, if that object's loop was relatively sparse, the player would still get audio feedback quickly that the object was part of the song. These fills are also side-chained within Wwise to completely duck the signal of the original loop if they both happen to play at the same time. This ensures that the two elements never compete and the player is only ever hearing one sound per object. The last real challenge with this project was finding the right mix between the music being diegetic or not. I played around with a couple options, the first being having the music entirely in the player's head. And while I found this resulted in a better sound, it left the player somewhat removed from the experience of being in the apartment. The other option was having the music and individual loops be entirely localized based off of their in-game location. While this allowed the player to really get up close and personal with each individual sound, it resulted in a kind of disorienting player experience as the panning of each object was constantly spinning around depending on the player's direction. What I ended up landing on was to keep the music entirely mono and having it play out of each speaker. This kept the player feeling like the music was localized to the apartment, but still relatively close to the mix that would be rendered if the music played back in a more traditional linear fashion. With localization sorted out, I still wanted the player to be able to have some ability to hear each element of the song more closely when they were in proximity to it. To do this, I have RTPCs that isolate the sound of an individual element as the player approaches it. Player proximity boosts volume of the object that they are approaching, as well as uses a high shelf to muffle the rest of the mix. That's pretty much it. Thank you so much for watching, and if you're interested in a full playthrough, a link will be showing up in the video right now.